Life has a curious way of surprising us, slipping moments into our path that alter the direction we thought we were headed. My name is Ryan. I'm 26, an architect who recently traded the familiar for the fast-paced rhythm of New York City after landing a coveted role at a prominent design firm. Between unpacking boxes, learning subway lines, and adjusting to Manhattan's relentless tempo, I faced what seemed like a simple task: choosing a new primary care physician. What I never imagined was that this routine decision would open the door to an experience that would reshape my life. I've always been the kind of person who avoided doctors unless absolutely necessary. Over-the-counter remedies and the occasional urgent care visit had always been enough. But my new insurance required a full physical within 4 months. After delaying as long as possible one chilly Thursday evening in October, I finally opened the online provider directory. That's when I found Dr. Daniel. His credentials were impressive. Harvard Medical School graduate, author of several medical journal papers, countless glowing patient reviews. But one detail stood out: his focus on LGBTQ+ healthcare. As a gay man who'd endured more than a few awkward, even dismissive encounters with doctors in the past, that felt like a rare and reassuring green flag. The following week, I arrived at his clinic, a sleek, modern building tucked into downtown Manhattan, its glass facade glittering in the morning light. Inside, it felt less like a medical office and more like a wellness retreat. Soft instrumental music drifted through the air, laced with the faint scent of lavender. It was warm, calming, so unlike the sharp, sterile atmosphere I usually associated with doctors' visits. "Mr. Anderson." The receptionist's voice pulled me back. "Dr. Daniel will see you now." I followed her down a hallway lined with abstract paintings until she opened the door to a sunlit corner office. And that's when I saw him. Dr. Daniel stood near his desk, reviewing what I assumed were my intake forms. He was tall, at least 6'3", with broad shoulders that strained the fit of his tailored white coat. Dark hair threaded with subtle streaks of silver framed his face. And then he looked up. His eyes' clear, piercing blue met mine. And for a moment, I forgot why I was even there. "Ryan," he said, stepping forward with a hand extended and a steady, confident smile. "Welcome." His handshake was firm, professional, but there was something in the way his fingers lingered against mine, just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It sent a quiet shiver racing down my spine. "I see you've just relocated to New York," he said, his voice deep, carrying the faintest trace of a Boston accent. It added a warmth I didn't expect. My focus betrayed me. I found myself watching the way his lips shaped each word. Precise, deliberate, and strangely captivating. "Yes," I managed, forcing my tone steady. "It's been about 2 months now. I moved for work. Architecture, right?" he confirmed, glancing down at my file again. "That would explain the meticulous detail in your medical history. Most people aren't quite this thorough." A smile tugged at my lips before I could stop it. Heat rising faintly in my cheeks. "Occupational hazard," I admitted. "We tend to obsess over details." His smile in return lit the room. "Well, that definitely makes my job easier. Let's get started, shall we?" I settled into the chair beside his desk, but my attention wasn't on the clipboard or the routine. It was on him, on the quiet authority he carried. The way it blended with a genuine kindness that made me feel both nervous and strangely at ease at the same time. When the exam began, I was hyper-aware of everything. The warmth of his hands as he secured the blood pressure cuff around my arm, the deliberate steadiness of his movements, the subtle nearness of him, and then there was his cologne, cedarwood and something deeper, inherently masculine, filling the small space between us. "Your blood pressure is slightly elevated," he noted, a crease forming between his brows. "Nothing serious." "Are you feeling anxious?" "Just medical visits in general," I answered quickly, though we both knew it was more than that. His smile was soft, reassuring, but not clinical. It felt personal. "That's more common than you think," he said. "Why don't we talk for a bit first? It might help you relax." He leaned back into his chair, his gaze steady, attentive. And in that moment, the exam shifted into something else entirely. So he said, his tone inviting, "Tell me about your work. What brought you here?" For the next 17 minutes, it wasn't a checkup. It was a conversation. Easy, fluid. We talked about my career, the leap I'd made to New York, the chaos of the city, and even the small details, what surprised me, what frustrated me, what still felt unfamiliar. And through it all, Dr. Daniel wasn't just listening. He was present entirely, like every word mattered. He was an engaging conversationalist, effortlessly balancing professional curiosity with genuine warmth. As he shared his own story of relocating to Chicago 7 years ago, then asked thoughtful questions about my background, the sterile weight of the exam room slowly faded. For Amament, it felt less like an appointment and more like a conversation between two people discovering common ground. Then with quiet authority, he rose from his chair. "Well, Ryan," he said, his tone steady but kind, "shall we move ahead with the physical exam?" He handed me a neatly folded gown, nodding toward the small bathroom in the corner. "You can use that space to change. Just remove your clothes, but leave your undergarments on." Inside the bathroom, I paused at the mirror as I undressed. Years of swimming and workouts had kept me in shape, but an unexpected wave of self-consciousness caught me off guard. Every small imperfection felt magnified under the harsh light. Slipping into the thin gown, I felt oddly exposed, its flimsy fabric doing little to protect me from the vulnerability of the moment. When I stepped back out, Dr. Daniel's expression remained composed, though for a fraction of a second I thought I caught his eyes flicker downward before returning to mine with clinical neutrality. "Please have a seat on the exam table," he said, tapping the paper-covered surface. I lifted myself onto it, the gown shifting a little higher on my thighs than I intended. His gaze remained professional, but something unspoken lingered in the air. The exam began in familiar rhythm, ears, throat, breathing, yet I couldn't ignore the subtle charge that came with every touch. When the stethoscope pressed cold against my chest, his other hand rested lightly on my back for balance. Through the thin gown, his palm radiated warmth. "Take a deep breath," he instructed, his voice lower, closer than it needed Toby. I obeyed, my pulse hammering louder with each inhale. His hand slid slightly down the line of my spine, steady but deliberate. "Your heart rate is running high," he observed, his brow furrowing with quiet focus. "Are you feeling nervous?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stalled as our eyes locked. The room grew still, charged with something neither of us spoke aloud. After a moment, he cleared his throat, his voice returning to professional calm. "Lie back, please. I'll need to examine your abdomen." The paper beneath me crackled as I reclined. The gown shifted again, leaving me acutely aware of every inch of exposed skin. His hands pressed firmly but gently along my abdomen, methodical, careful, yet carrying a subtle tension that mirrored my own. My heart hammered beneath the thin gown, the room suddenly far too warm. A light sheen of sweat formed across my skin as Dr. Daniel snapped on a fresh pair of latex gloves. The sound cracked through the silence, sharp and deliberate. "I'm going to lift the gown now," he said, his tone measured and professional, though there was the faintest hesitation in his voice. "Let me know if anything feels uncomfortable." His hands moved carefully but lingered just a moment too long before continuing. For a flicker of a second, something unguarded flashed in his expression before his composure returned. I felt exposed, not just physically, but in a way that reached deeper, as though he could see straight through me. He continued the exam with precision, his movements steady, yet carrying an undercurrent of something unspoken. Each press of his hand along my abdomen sent a ripple through me, forcing me to focus on steadying my breath. His eyes studied not only my posture and muscles, but somehow my reactions too. "Everything looks healthy," he said at last, his voice calm, but slightly rougher than before. "Although I do notice some tension in your muscles. Do you experience discomfort when sitting or working for long hours?" Sometimes, I admitted, my voice uneven. "Especially at my desk." "Sit up for me," he instructed, removing his gloves. "I'd like to check your back muscles." I adjusted on the table, the gown loosening around me. He stepped behind and placed his hands firmly on my shoulders. The warmth of direct contact startled me, unexpectedly grounding yet electrifying. His fingers pressed gently into the knots of tension along my back. "You're carrying a lot of stress here," he murmured, his voice low, close enough to make my pulse stutter. His thumbs found a tight spot and an involuntary sound escaped my throat. "Does that hurt?" Hesked quietly. "No," I whispered. "It actually feels better." For a heartbeat, his hands stilled. I noticed his breathing shift slower, heavier. The air between us thickening with something that wasn't entirely professional. "Ryan," he said, almost under his breath, as though confessing to himself more than to me. "It's difficult at times to stay completely objective." I turned slightly, catching his gaze. The intensity in his eyes left little room for misunderstanding. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," I murmured back. The silence stretched, charged enough to press and on both of us. His hand slipped lower along my arms. Not clinical now, but thoughtful, almost hesitant. "This isn't professional," he whispered, though he didn't step away. "Then stop," I said softly, meeting his challenge with one of my own. The conflict was written across his face. Finally, he pulled back with a steadying breath, running a hand through his hair. "Boundaries matter," he said, though the regret was unmistakable in his tone. "Let's finish the exam properly." The rest of the checkup unfolded with renewed professionalism. Yet the undercurrent between us never disappeared. Every word, every touch carried the weight of what almost slipped through. When I dressed and stepped back into the office, my mind was still spinning. Dr. Daniel sat at his desk, finishing his notes. Looking up, he met my eyes with the faintest trace of something unspoken. "Medically, everything looks good," he said evenly. "However, I strongly recommend you find another primary care provider moving forward," he said, his tone carefully even. "I can recommend a few excellent specialists," nodded, forcing a smile to hide the weight pressing into my chest. Then I added almost before I realized I was speaking. "But maybe we could continue this conversation somewhere else, over coffee, away from the office." He studied me for a moment longer than necessary, his expression unreadable. Then silently, he reached for his prescription pad. After scribbling something down, he tore the page and handed it to me. "This is my personal number," he said quietly. "I'm off duty after 8. I knew better. But that evening, I still found myself at a tucked-away cafe just a couple of blocks from the medical center. Daniel, no white coat, no title, just Daniel, as he insisted, was already there, dressed down in casual clothes. He was somehow even more disarming than the polished professional I'd met hours earlier. "I've never done this before," he admitted, stirring his coffee slowly. 18 years of practice, and I've always kept a clear line between work and my personal life. "What changed today?" I asked, leaning in. He gave a small, almost vulnerable smile. "Something about you, your honesty, the way you carry yourself." I felt a connection I've never experienced with any patient. We talked for hours. He shared his dream of opening a community clinic, his childhood in Boston, and the challenges of accepting his identity during medical school. "You want to create a space where people feel safe," he explained softly, "where they know they won't be judged for who they are." By the time the cafe lights dimmed, neither of us seemed ready for the night to end. The crisp autumn air wrapped around us as we walked side by side through the quiet streets, our shoulders brushing with every other step. "My place isn't far," Daniel said at last, hesitant but hopeful. "If you'd like to come up for a drink just to talk." His apartment was on the 22nd floor of a sleek high-rise, the city stretching endlessly beneath us. Inside it was modern but personal medical texts sharing shelves with classic novels and art volumes. "Wine?" he asked, already reaching for a bottle. I nodded, watching him move with a relaxed ease I hadn't seen earlier. Here outside the hospital walls, he was lighter, more himself. We settled onto his leather sofa, the skyline glittering behind us. Conversation flowed easily from architecture to philosophy to the quirks of city living. The wine softened the edges until the space between us seemed to disappear altogether. "I can't stop thinking about earlier," Daniel admitted finally, his voice low. "What happened in the exam room?" I've never let myself blur the line like that. "You didn't lose control," I countered gently. "If anything, you showed restraint." He laughed softly, almost self-consciously. "It wasn't easy." His voice trailed off, but the look in his eyes said everything. When his hand found mine, his fingers lacing slowly between my own, I felt the faintest tremor in his touch. "There's no going back to being just doctor and patient after tonight," he whispered, his face so close I could feel the warmth of his breath. "I don't want to go back," I replied. Our first kiss was careful, tentative, searching, a question and an answer all at once. His lips were warm, tasting faintly of the wine, and though the city lights burned brightly behind us, it felt like the world had gone still. One hand Rosetto cradled my jaw, while the other pulled me closer until no distance remained at all. The kiss deepened, hunger replacing hesitation, and when Daniel finally drew back, his breath came in uneven bursts. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice strained, almost uncertain. I answered not with words, but by tugging him closer again, my hand sliding up beneath the edge of his shirt, drawn to the warmth of his skin. He exhaled a quiet, helpless sound, and in that moment, the last traces of his professional distance dissolved completely. What followed blurred into waves of touch, laughter, and unguarded closeness. The careful barriers that had once defined us, doctor and patient, polite conversation and formal boundaries, were gone. Now every movement belonged only to connection. Every glance carrying weight, every brush of his hand echoing with something deeper. Daniel seemed transformed, more human, more vulnerable than the polished professional I'd first met. His presence was magnetic, and the longer I stayed near him, the harder it became to imagine stepping away. The world outside his apartment disappeared, replaced by the glow of the city skyline filtering through tall windows. Time lost its edges as we explored one another in a way that felt both daring and inevitable. Every word he whispered, every smile he offered was filled with something I couldn't quite name but couldn't ignore. I felt seen completely, profoundly, and the intensity of it left me breathless. We ended up in his bedroom, a quiet sanctuary above the city, bathed in the faint light of skyscrapers. There was nothing clinical here, nothing professional, only a man allowing himself to feel. Daniel's touch was no longer about examination or routine. It was about discovery, reverence, and need. His voice, low and unsteady, carried both longing and awe, as he promised he wanted to know every part of me, not as a doctor, but as someone who cared far more deeply. The night became a symphony of connection. Every laugh, every shared breath, every fleeting pause strung together into something unforgettable. I found myself memorizing the rhythm of his heartbeat, the warmth of his hand tracing mine, the way his eyes lingered as though he couldn't quite believe what was happening either. When at last the intensity ebbed, it left us tangled in quiet stillness, the city glowing softly around us. We lay together, not speaking at first, only breathing the same air, every rise and fall of our chest sinking, as though our bodies already knew something our minds hadn't yet admitted. Finally, Daniel broke the silence with a quiet laugh, shaking his head as though at a loss for words. I pressed my palm gently to his chest, feeling the rapid thrum beneath. "Better than any checkup," I teased softly, earning another breathless laugh from him. Peace settled over us, yet beneath it ran the undeniable weight of reality. What this meant, what lines had been crossed, and what came next. What had begun as a simple appointment had become something impossible to walk away from, something powerful, complicated, and deeply alive. "You should transfer your care to Dr. Stevens," Daniel murmured after a long pause, his lips brushing against my temple as he spoke. "She's incredible, and I know she'll always make your health a priority." His words were practical, necessary, but the way his arms tightened around me told me he wasn't ready to let go either. "Always the diligent doctor," I teased, though I couldn't help but admire how thorough and thoughtful he was. "Have you thought about what comes next?" Hesked, propping himself onto one elbow so he could look at me properly. His piercing blue eyes locked onto mine, unwavering. "Honestly, I admitted it's been all I've thought about since the moment I stepped into your office this morning. This isn't just attraction for me, Daniel." His voice softened, almost vulnerable. "There's something here, something I can't ignore. It feels different." I knew exactly what he meant. Despite the unusual way we met, the connection between us was undeniable. It ran deeper than surface chemistry. "I want to do this right," he continued. "Real dates, time together outside of medical files and exam rooms. I want to know you." "I'd like that." I smiled, tugging him down for another kiss. That night stretched into hours of conversation, storytelling, and shared warmth. Daniel opened up about his childhood dream of becoming a doctor, how watching his grandmother battle illness had shaped his purpose. I shared my own passion for sustainable architecture, my vision of designing spaces that could heal and inspire. By dawn, soft pink and gold light tinted the New York skyline. Daniel made us coffee and we stood together at his window, his arms circling me from behind as the city slowly came alive. "Stay for breakfast," he whispered against my neck. "I make a means, Benedict. Only if you promise to cook wearing nothing but that apron," I teased, twisting in his arms. His laugh was warm and unguarded. "Deal." Though I have to warn you, kitchen safety is serious business. The weeks that followed blurred into a heady rush of passion and discovery. Daniel and I settled into an easy rhythm, filling every spare moment with each other. His schedule as a physician was relentless, but he always carved out time for us. My clothes began to live at this place without me even noticing. My toothbrush found a permanent spot beside his. One evening, about a month in, I was working late at my firm when a delivery arrived. Dinner from my favorite Thai spot. Inside the bag was a note. "Eat something healthy. Doctor's orders. See you tonight." Jay! I might find inspiring. I'd doodle building sketches on his morning newspaper without realizing it. Piece by piece, we were building something that felt real. Of course, challenges came with it. The medical world was small, and soon enough, whispers started about how exactly we'd met. Daniel faced it all with his usual quiet confidence. He never denied our relationship, but he made sure everyone knew he'd followed protocol. Transferring my care immediately silenced the whispers, but it didn't silence our hearts. One night, curled up with me on his couch, Daniel admitted, "I've never been happier." The physical pull between us never dulled, but it was the emotional intimacy that surprised us both. Daniel let me see the weight he carried, the fear of burnout, the ache of losing patience, his dream of one day opening a dedicated LGBTQ+ health clinic. In return, I told him about my own doubts, the fractured ties with my conservative family, and the dreams I was still chasing. One night stands out vividly in my memory. After we'd left each other breathless and tangled in the sheets, Daniel traced the lines of my face with his fingertip. "Move in with me," he said. The words were unexpected but not unwelcome. "I know it's fast, but I don't want to wake up without you." His certainty sent a thrill down my spine. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "Your reputation?" "My reputation comes from being a damn good doctor," he interrupted with a smile. "But I'm also a man in love, and I'm not hiding that." That quiet confession changed everything. Moving in together didn't feel like a leap. It felt like the natural next step. My sleek, minimalist furniture blended seamlessly with his modern aesthetic. My sketches found a home alongside his medical books. Sharing one space added layers to our relationship. I loved watching him get ready for work. Every movement practiced, every detail precise, and he seemed to love catching me sketching late into the night, always bringing coffee and rubbing my shoulders as I worked. Our connection deepened, becoming more intuitive, more exploratory. His knowledge of the body, paired with his growing understanding of mine, led to nights neither of us would forget. We broke in every corner of that apartment, even his home office, where patient files were often abandoned in favor of something far more distracting. "You're a terrible influence," he teased more than once, trying to restore order to his desk. "This room is never going to feel professional again." 5 months after we moved in, life threw us a curveball. I was in the middle of a high-stakes sustainable housing project when Daniel started acting different. Private calls, vague excuses, shifting plans. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but my mind couldn't help imagining the worst. Then one evening, he asked me to meet him downtown. The address led me to a freshly renovated medical office, empty but full of possibility. "What do you think?" Asked, watching me closely as I wandered through the space. "It's perfect," I said honestly. The light, the layout, everything felt right. "It's ideal for a clinic." "That's what I thought," he said, pulling out a thick folder. "I've been working on this for a while. Remember that dream I told you about opening an LGBTQ+ clinic?" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "You want to make it real, and I was hoping you'd design the interiors." I stared at him, overwhelmed not just by the idea, but by the trust it represented. "You want us to build this together?" "I want everything with you," Daniel said, his voice steady. "In life, in love, and now in work. Your vision for space and healing fits my vision for care. You make me better at this." That clinic became our shared labor of love. Over the following months, we poured ourselves into it, blending my biophilic design concepts with his vision of holistic, inclusive healthcare. Natural materials, calming textures, intuitive layouts. We wanted every inch to feel safe and welcoming for the community we were building it for. And through it all, we built something else too. A life, a future, a partnership neither of us had seen coming, but both knew was meant to be. His passion was infectious as he meticulously crafted specialized services and organized support groups. We spent countless evenings at home, him immersed in reviewing medical protocols, while I fine-tuned every design element. Of course, we often got sidetracked by kisses and more. The night before the clinic's grand opening, we stood in the fully completed space, our arms wrapped around each other. The walls were painted in soothing shades I had carefully chosen, adorned with artwork from talented local LGBTQ+ artists. The private consultation rooms offered a sense of comfort and professionalism, striking the perfect balance. The waiting area felt nothing like a sterile medical office. Instead, it welcomed guests like a warm, inviting living room. "It's perfect," Daniel whispered, pulling me in closer. "Just like that day you walked into my exam room," he added softly. "You mean the day you desperately tried to keep things professional?" I teased. He laughed, then suddenly turned me to face him, his expression shifting into something serious. Before I could say a word, he dropped to one knee, a small box appearing in his hand. "Ryan, this past year has been the most incredible of my life. You've not only helped me bring my professional dreams to life, but you've made every single one of my personal dreams come true, too. Will you marry me? The ring was sleek and masculine, a platinum band with a delicate engraving inside. Love heals all. Yes, I whispered through the tears that blurred my vision, pulling him up into a kiss full of every emotion I couldn't put into words 1,000 times. Later that night, as we celebrated in the most intimate way, I couldn't help but wonder how a simple medical checkup had led us here. Daniel's hands, steady yet tender, traced familiar paths across my skin with practiced care. You know, he murmured softly against my neck, I never properly thanked you for choosing me as your doctor that day. I laughed, pulling him closer. Oh, I think you've thanked me plenty. Still, I wouldn't mind some extra gratitude. His smile curved against my skin before his lips claimed mine again. And as we made love that night, I understood this wasn't just desire or fleeting infatuation. It had deepened into something enduring, something that bound us in ways I hadn't thought possible. Our story had started in a brightly lit exam room, but it had grown to fill every corner of our lives, personal, professional, and everything in between. The following morning, as we opened the clinic's doors for the first time, I stood back and watched Daniel welcome the earliest patients with the same warmth and compassion that had drawn me to him from the start. His presence radiated safety, belonging, and care. And yet now, when his eyes found mine across the room, there was no longer secrecy, no hidden longing or quiet restraint. Instead, there was certainty, partnership, love. We had found our perfect rhythm, healing others while nurturing the life we were building together.